Hey there. Tonight we're going way back, not to marble palaces or thunderbolts in the sky, but to the old myths told under open stars, to the labours, the legends, and the long winding story of a man who was strong, yes, but also lost, flawed, and deeply human. This isn't a tale of glory shouted from mountain tops. It's one of burden, of effort, of endurance. The kind of quiet heroism that comes from simply carrying on. If stories like this help you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. There's something strangely comforting about seeing all the places where these quiet stories reach. So, dim the lights. Settle in. Let your thoughts slow. And let's begin at the beginning of a myth that somehow still matters. Let us begin gently with a tale as old as temples and twilight, one nestled in the fold of myth, embroidered with the silk of ancient superstition, and dusted lightly, as ever, with the fingerprints of mortal confusion. This is the story of Heracles, or, if you're partial to the Roman stylings, Hercules. But let us not rush. After all, you're likely listening to this in bed, and no one ever stormed Olympus with a yawn. Our tale begins not in the heavens but on earth, in the city of Thebes, though even that name carries the usual haze of mythological vagueness. There, a mortal woman named Alcmene lived. She was of noble blood, patient temperament, and, crucially, married. Her husband, Amphitryon, was away at war, which in Greek mythology was always a bit like leaving the windows open in a thunderstorm. Something unexpected was bound to sneak in. Enter Zeus, or rather, descend Zeus, king of the gods. Storm-wielding, beard-flowing, nymph-pursuing Zeus, whose marital fidelity could best be described as conceptual. Now, Zeus had taken a liking to Alcmene, not because she sought divine company, but because she didn't. And as Greek myth goes, that was practically an invitation. Zeus disguised himself as Amphitryon, returning from war a bit earlier than scheduled, and spent the night with Alcmene. He even stretched the night into 3, manipulating time as only a thunder god can, which seems excessive even by divine standards. Alcmene, unsuspecting, believed it was her husband, and thus the seed of a demigod was planted. The next morning, the real Amphitryon arrived. Understandably, Alcmene was confused. Amphitryon too was puzzled when she congratulated him on their romantic evening, which he hadn't yet had. Eventually, the truth unravelled like a poorly spun thread, and the whole affair, as one might expect, upset quite a few people. But none so much as Hera. Ah yes, Hera, Queen of Olympus, wife of Zeus. Long-suffering, sharp-eyed, and understandably furious, though rarely at the correct target. Her fury was rarely levelled at Zeus himself. Instead it fell upon the women he pursued and the children born from these celestial indiscretions. And in this case, it fell squarely upon the unborn Hercules. Now let's pause for a moment of historical context. The Greeks believed their gods were not omnipotent in the way later religions framed divinity. The Olympians had strengths, yes, but also failings, pettiness, jealousy, and a distressing lack of conflict resolution skills. They were, in essence, a divine soap opera, and Hera played her role with unmatched theatrical flair. When Hera learned of Alcmene's pregnancy, she did not simply fume in silence. No, she sought to prevent Hercules' birth altogether. she persuaded her daughter Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, to delay the labour indefinitely. Alcmain, poor woman, was stuck in a loop of eternal contractions, an agonizing magical stalemate. Fortunately, her servant Galanthis tricked Eileithyia by shouting that the child had been born, startling the goddess into loosening her spell. And thus Hercules entered the world. From the very beginning, he was no ordinary child. For one, he was enormous. Infant Hercules was said to have the strength of many grown men and the appetite of a small army, a rather inconvenient combination in a nursery. Hera, still determined to ruin his existence, devised another plan. One day, she sent 2 serpents into his cradle. Presumably, she hoped for a quiet assassination. But the infant, as the myth goes, grabbed one snake in each hand and strangled them. When his nurse returned, she found him gurgling contentedly, the serpents hanging limp like discarded toys. This story is one of the earliest recorded in the Hercules cycle, and it appears in vase paintings and early classical literature. One amphora from around 520 BCE shows Hercules gripping the snakes with exaggerated ease, while spectators stand aghast. Scholars suggest the tale served a dual purpose, entertaining the masses and illustrating divine strength from the very cradle. It also set the tone for what was to come. Hercules' life, from infancy to eventual apotheosis, will be a long negotiation between divine favour and divine punishment. He was beloved and reviled, blessed and cursed, the perfect mythological contradiction. Now, Hercules was not an only child. Alcmain bore another son, Iphicles, sired by her actual husband, Amphitryon. So the household had twin boys, one divine, one mortal. You can imagine family dinners were slightly awkward. Iphicles, though brave and noble in his own right, would always live in his brother's formidable shadow. The Greeks, ever fond of metaphors, used this duality to explore themes of fate, lineage, and the blurry lines between man and god. Let us drift now to Hercules' childhood. As a youth, he was tutored by the finest minds in Greece. Chiron the centaur, wise and gentle, taught him medicine and music. Linus, a stern music master, tried to teach him the lyre, a standard part of noble education at the time. Unfortunately, Hercules had little patience for scales, and even less for correction. When Linus struck him for a mistake, Hercules responded by striking back with a lyre. The incident ended tragically, and Hercules was sent into exile for manslaughter. Greek legends are replete with such educational mishaps. Despite the setback, Hercules grew in strength and stature. He hunted lions, wrestled centaurs, and completed feats that would put any modern gym regimen to shame. One particularly early exploit included defeating a lion ravaging the plains of Ciphaeron. He wore its skin thereafter, the same pelt often confused with the Nemean lions in later tales. Hercules was also known for his appetite, not just for food, but for experience. He drank deeply from the cup of life, often to the alarm of those nearby. One anecdote tells of him single-handedly finishing an entire banquet before the other guests had even arrived. Whether true or not, it cemented his image as larger than life in every conceivable way. Yet he was not without fault. His temper, especially, was both legendary and dangerous, a flaw that would follow him throughout his life. The most tragic result of this flaw came in early adulthood. Hera, ever the patient strategist, struck again, not with serpents but with madness. One day, under her influence, Hercules lost all sense of reality. In his madness, he killed his wife Megara and their children. The grief, when he recovered his senses, was all-consuming. He sought penance in the only way the Greeks knew how: purification through suffering. At the Oracle of Delphi, he begged for guidance. The Pythia, speaking the will of Apollo, instructed him to serve King Eurystheus of Tiryns and perform a series of labours. Tasks so immense, they were considered nearly impossible. Only through this penance could Hercules cleanse the stain of his past and earn immortality. But that is a tale for another chapter. Historically speaking, the Greeks did not simply invent Hercules out of whole cloth. He may have originated as a hero in Mycenaean times. His name appears in Linear B tablets from the Bronze Age, spelled as Heracles. Over the centuries, his legend expanded and shifted, adapting to each generation's needs. In the 5th century BCE, Athenian playwrights portrayed him as a tragic figure, while the Romans later transformed him into a symbol of imperial strength. He was also worshipped, not just told of in taverns and epics, but honoured in sanctuaries and festivals. The cult of Heracles had real-world followers who left offerings at temples, prayed for protection, and even ran athletic games in his name. The Olympic Games themselves, while officially tied to Zeus, sometimes included tributes to Heracles as a mythic founder. Heracles also appears frequently in Etruscan art, often bearing the name Hercle. His figure stood as a bridge between mythologies, adopted and reinterpreted across the ancient Mediterranean. He became the model of the strong man who triumphs through suffering, a theme that resonated across centuries. And so, we close this chapter where it all began, in a cradle, with a baby who squeezed serpents and never quite knew peace. Born of gods and raised among mortals, Hercules began life as a contradiction wrapped in muscle and prophecy. He would go on to fight monsters, cross into the underworld, and die in agony upon a funeral pyre. But not yet, for now he sleeps, as I hope do you. Let us pick up our tale not in glory, but in grief. For before Hercules became the world's most famously employed hero, he first had to fall, hard, tragically, and publicly. This chapter, gentle listener, begins with madness. Divine madness, to be precise. The sort that creeps in not with the rustle of leaves or a storm on the horizon, but with the quiet whisper of a goddess holding a grudge. When last we left Hercules, he had grown into a towering figure, both in myth and in muscle. Strength unmatched, appetite legendary, beard doing most of the work at parties. He had married Megara, a princess of Thebes, and by most accounts was settling into the domestic rhythm of noble life. Perhaps even, dare we suggest it, happiness. This was, of course, unacceptable to Hera. The Queen of Olympus, still smarting from her husband's extracurricular siring of demigods, waited. Hera never forgot. Nor, it must be said, did she forgive. It wasn't long before she struck again. This time she used no serpents or tangled spells. She used madness, the most insidious of divine weapons. One moment Hercules was at peace. The next, the world became an unbearable shifting nightmare. Hera drove Hercules mad. Temporarily, yes, but devastatingly so. In his confusion and fury, he mistook his wife and children for enemies. What followed was not a battle, it was a massacre. By the time he returned to his senses, the palace was silent. His family gone. The horror of it shattered him. And so, the strongest man in Greece fell not in war, but in his own home. felled not by enemy spear, but by a god's whispered curse. The Greeks called this Ate, a ruinous madness sent by the gods. It was not simply misfortune, but a moment of divine reckoning. Even heroes, it seemed, were not safe from collapse. Let us pause here, as the Greeks did, to consider the implications. In myth, this was not merely a tragedy. It was a moral reckoning, a cosmic balancing. The Greeks believed strongly in miasma, the pollution of the soul after such acts. Hercules, polluted by his crime, could not simply carry on. No feast, no prayer, no apology could erase such a stain. He needed purification. And purification, for a Greek hero, was never gentle. He travelled, broken and barefoot, to Delphi, where the oracle of Apollo sat cloaked in smoke and mystery. It was she, through divine inspiration, who prescribed the cure, servitude. Specifically, Hercules was to serve King Eurystheus of Tiryns for 12 years. Eurystheus, it must be said, was not the sort of man you'd hope to meet in a moment of personal crisis. Small of stature, large of ego, and arguably over-fond of reclining while others laboured, Eurystheus was a petty cousin of Hercules. And thanks to a twist of fate and a bit of Hera's meddling, it was Eurystheus, not Hercules, who inherited the throne of Mycenae.